Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of the poker vlog. Today's video comes from another tournament at Spades. It's their chill tournament where it's a single re-entry and you get a single add-on at break as well. I have a lot of really good footage from this session. It was great. I played very well and I can't wait to share it with y'all. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Next hand that we're looking at, we look down at ace-7 offsuit and the hijack. And when the low jack decides to limp in, I decide to raise it 4 times the big blind for 1600. And we end up getting my buddy in the button and the small blind and the low jack to call. So now we're heading 4 ways to the flop, which is ace-5-2 with 2 hearts. Low jack checks and I raise to 3500 and we get the button to call. And when he does, the small blind goes all in. And then the low jack actually goes all in for more. So I'm sitting here pretending like I have a tough decision, but honestly, my ace pair with a semi-decent kicker, too good to keep. So I fold. The button actually takes longer, but ends up folding. Wanted to show us he had 10 out of hearts, so he ends up folding. So now it's heads up between the small blind and the low jack, and we see that the small blind actually has jack 4 of hearts. And the low jack has ace-3 of hearts. So the run out shows that the ace pair wins, but we see that my 7 kicker actually would have played. So I could have taken down a big pot, but oh well. The next hand we're looking at, we look down at 3-4 of hearts in the under the gun position. So I decide just to call, just to try and open my range a little bit. And the hijack actually raises to 2500 and we get the button to call, so I call as well just to see a flop. Flop is 4-5-6 rainbow, so it doesn't really connect and it checks through pretty quick, but the turn gives us the 7, which gives me the low end of the straight. Thinking of a good size to bet, I settle on 3000 and the hijack player actually ends up making the call pretty quick and the button decides to fold. So now we're on to the river and we see that it is the 8. So now we're not working with anything, playing the board. I decide to bet 10,000, try and represent the 9, but he thinks a little bit. He's giving me crap for filming, so he's messing with me. Ends up calling and I show my hand, how I got counterfeit, but oh well, it was a chop, but it's still a win. The next hand we're looking at, we look down at Queen 9 of diamonds. The low jack decides to limp in, but I raise to 2500. I just love Queen 9. I don't know why. But we get the big blind to call and the low jack to call as well. So now we're heading to the flop and we see that it's King Jack 3 with 2 hearts. The small blind checks and the low jack player actually decides to check as well. I bet 5k. Feeling lucky with my straight draw, and when the big blind folds, the low jack player actually decides to go all in. So he's got a decent amount of my stack, trying to figure out how much I'd have left and not really sure what to make of this, trying to think of what kind of hands he could be playing. But at the end of the day, I do end up deciding to make the call. And when I do, we finally see what we're up against. We see that the low jack has king, queen of spades for top pair and a decent kicker. So only looking for a 10 here. Turn doesn't give it to us, but the river, there it is. So we end up hitting the river for the straight and end up knocking that player out. So a big pot coming our way. The next hand we get dealt, we look down at the beautiful ace queen of spades in the big blind. So when it folds around to the middle position, he just decides to limp in. But I like this hand, great raising hand in the big blind. So I decide to bump it up to 25,000 and the middle position ends up calling. So now we're heads up to the flop and we see that it is ace 8-5 rainbow. So I decide to check and try and trap him a little bit, which ends up working because he ends up betting 25k. And yeah, it's a pretty easy call. The turn gives us a queen, so now I've upgraded to top 2, try to check, but it checks through, and the river is the 4 of hearts, which brings the backdoor flush draw. So I'm a little conflicted here. I want to see how much he has behind that we can try and bet him off of. I, in the moment, decide to put him all in. Looking back, I think if I would have been able to bet probably anywhere from 50 to 60% of his stack, I would have been able to get a call. But he ends up deciding to fold. So, still a decent pot. This next hand we're looking at, we look down at pocket eights in the hijack. And when the low jack and middle position decide to limp in, I decide to bump things up to 16K, which is just 4 big blinds. Just trying to get some looser hands to get out of there. And we only get the big blind to call. So we are heads up heading to the flop. At this point, when we're getting ready to go to the flop, we see that the big blind actually checks in the dark, which is weird. We see that the flop is Jack 10-3 complete rainbow. So I decided to bet for 15,000, and he actually check raises to 45,000, which is an interesting play. But I end up deciding it's at least worth the call. So with that call, we now end up heading to the turn, which is the 4 of diamonds. So now there's 2 flush draws there, and he decides to go all in. So now I'm stuck in a weird spot because I'm trying to think of what kind of hands would check blind before the flop and decide to check raise, and just this line of play does not really make sense to me. So I decided to carve out the chips just to kind of see how much I have up at stake, and yeah, it's a lot. But I'm sitting there thinking, and I can't really put him on anything. I feel like he's on maybe a flush draw or some 2 overcards that he's just wanting to hit. But I don't know. I decided to stick in the call reluctantly. And we end up, it was a good one, which was ace queen of spades. So the river gives us the 3 of clubs. We see that we end up winning. Not really happy with how I played this. I definitely should have folded. But when we win, we look at that our stack is actually 313,000 going into the next hand. Now we look down at ace 7 offsuit under the gun. With the blinds at 6,000, I decided to raise to 15K, try and get some extra callers. I know my hand is pretty loose to raise under the gun, but I've been running pretty good. Then when it folds to the big blind, he actually decides to raise it up to 75K, and this should have been a clear sign for me to get out of it, but I don't know what was going on in my head. So I end up making the call. Let's see if I hit the flop, and I don't. We see that as queen 8-4 with 2 hearts. So after a little bit of deliberation, the big blind actually decides to just go all in, which is a pretty easy snap fold for me. Luckily, we were able to see that he had pocket queens for the flop set. So yeah, way out of there. Now we look down at queen 10 of diamonds in the big blind, and the under the gun player just limps in. I bump it up to 13K, and I get the under the gun and the button players to call. The flop comes queen jack 2, so I check for the trap, but it checks pretty quick. So now the turn brings the 6 of diamonds. And at that point, I can't lose any more value. I bet 30K. Under the gun player folds, and the button decides to call after a little bit of thinking about it. Then the river brings the king of clubs. So the backdoor club draw does get there. So I think this is a good card for me to bet on, even though I have the second best pair on here. So I bet 75,000. Looking back on it, this is way too big of a sizing if I'm trying to get value, and it's proved because he folds quick. So good pot that I take down. This next hand, we look down at Jack 10 off, and I was a little late to record this hand, but when I got to me, I decided to bump it up to 15K. And at this point, we get the under the gun and low jack to call. So now we're heading 3 ways to the flop, and we see that the flop is ace 7-3 rainbow. So now that we've completely missed this flop, the under the gun player decides to check, and the low jack bets out for 30,000. and that's a pretty easy fold, and the other guy ends up folding as well. So now on to the next hand. Before we get into this next hand, I need to catch y'all up a little bit on what's happened. So, unfortunately, my GoPro actually ended up dying, so I wasn't able to catch a lot of video of some really good hands. However, good news is now that we have recharged our GoPro and we're good to go, we've actually made it to the final table, and we are only 4 ways. So although we weren't able to get a lot of any of the footage in between, we're at least able to see some of my end game play and see a lot more situational hands and be able to really go from there. So with that being said, let's go into this next hand. The first recorded hand of the final table, I looked down at 9-3 offsuit in the small blind, and the cutoff player calls and the button ends up folding. I might as well protect my small blind, so I call and the big blind calls as well. So now we're heading 3 ways to the flop, and the flop is 10-10-9 with 2 clubs. So I pair my 9, I check, and big blind leads out for 25,000. And I thought, yeah, might as well call. Let's see what happens. And then the turn brings us the 8 of diamonds. So now there's 2 flush draws and a straight draw. I check. He bets 100,000, and looking back on this, I definitely should have gotten out there. But in the moment, I said, yeah, let's call. Like I said, definitely not a good call, but at this point in the night, we were playing for a few hours. All of us at the table were having fun together, so just really wanting to hang out and have a good time with them. The river brings the 7 of diamonds, so the flush gets there. I decide to check, and then he flips his cards over, showing he has king 9 with a better kicker, and I reluctantly show, so nice. The very next deal, we look down at king 9 of clubs on the button, and the cutoff player actually ends up taking a little bit of time, but he ends up deciding to raise it pretty big to 75,000. So when he does that, I mean, I think this is a good place for me to jam. King 9 worked for the last guy, so let's hope it works for me. So I go all in, and my card's being suited as well. That definitely helps. So I put all my chips out there. It's about 315,000. And then the big blind rejams. He has me covered only by a little bit. So that's good to see. But when he calls, it gets to the cutoff, and he sits there thinking about for a while. He doesn't really know what to do. Obviously, this play so far has thrown him off a lot. So when it gets to him, he ends up deciding to fold. And I show my cards, and we show that it's basically a flip. We're up against pocket 5s. And we found out the cutoff actually folded ace king, which is, I don't know how you fold there. But, anyways, and I flop king, and you see is ace king 6 flop. The turn is a brick, and then the river is another brick. So now I got a massive double up, and heading on to the next hand, we are definitely in great shape. A couple hands go by, and we all have big stacks except for that cutoff in the last hand. I look down at Queen 8 of Hearts, and the short stack actually goes all in for, I think, a little bit less than just a big blind. So I call, and the big blind calls as well. And when we head to the flop, we see that the flop is 4-6-7 rainbow. So with that board, not really anything to bet at. I check, big blind checks pretty quick. The turn gives the ace of spades. I check, and he checks back. And the river is the 6 of spades. So it checks again quick. Big blind shows that he is jack 4. He has a Robbie hand. Paired his 4 on the flop. And the cutoff actually had pocket 3s. So it was a good hand to go all in, but he ended up getting out. And then right after this hand, we decided to do an ICM chop for just us 3 remaining. The guy in the middle, he ended up winning about $20 more than me. We had basically the same stacks. and the other guy, he was a little shorter than us, but yeah, it was a great tournament. It was a lot of fun, and it was a great experience, and I was really happy with how I played overall. Thank you for watching the video. I really appreciate the support. If you can please like it and share with your friends, that'd be greatly appreciated. It was a very great day, and it's always great when you win. And so it was a lot of fun having a good time with some good players and some great guys. I was in for the tournament for 80 bucks, and I got paid out about 640. And so after tips and after my buy-in, I came out positive 520 bucks. So definitely a great session, and I look forward to showing you the next one. Bye.